It's recording. Hey, I'm Lakshmi Rupa. This video is a presentation about my final project for 5060 Database Systems course. I'm going to give you an overview of what my application is about and what functionalities I've implemented. I created a weather application. So basically, you go to a screen, type a city name and say search. It's gonna give you data of weather data of that particular city location. And I've made a few other functionalities, sorting, filtering, and then searching of the searching with the city name and forecasting next 6 day weather data. And I have used, I made this application on .NET Core framework, which is cross-platform. You can run it on any OS, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, and for front end I used Angular, and for backend I used SQL Server. So I initially made this application on my local, and then I deployed it to AWS Cloud. By overriding the startup file on .NET application, and I used AWS Lambda. And also I created a AWS database instance. I used a free trial. And coming to the solution, I'm going to show you the solution explorer. So for this application, I created a single solution which contains both my front end and back end. I'll walk you through the code in a couple of minutes. I'll explain you the functionality of this. So the data which the UI shows, it's coming from Open API, Open Weather API. And the API looks, this is the website, and this is the API that I've used, and I have it on my notepad. So this is the API that I've used, and the response would contain these parameters. So it's going to give me time, sunrise, sunset, visibility, humidity, weather, and coordinates value, something like this. And going back to my application, so I just this is a home page. I just gave a project overview. You like navigate through the tabs and explore. Let's do that. I'm gonna go weather search. So this is our main first page, first Angular page. I'm gonna search a city. Let me search Denver. I'm gonna say check. So this is gonna get all the data. This is gonna get weather data for Denver location. So this is it. It's 2 degrees centigrade and it's in Kelvin scale. So the API gives temperature in Kelvin scale, and I converted it, and it's going to give me wind and wind speed and pressure and sunrise, sunset, visibility, city details. You must be wondering why it's 2:12 p.m. So this is in universal time zone. Okay, so let's go back to the screen again. When I say Denver and when I say check, so it's gonna, so for the users, it's like, oh, they're just searching and it's a get call. But what I am actually doing is I'm gonna insert this data into the database, and it's a trick formula. And yeah, basically it's a get call, and also I in the API I did an insert method to the database as well. And now all the cities that I've searched so far are gonna be in this screen. I wrote a get call and I'm bringing, oh, it's gonna take a while to load the screen. See? And I'm gonna bring, I got all the cities that I've searched so far on the screen, and I'm gonna say New York, and I say 6-day weather forecast, and it's gonna give me the data in Celsius, and this is all customizable. You can add how many ever parameters you want, and you can do that. And I say Chicago, 6-day weather forecast. The grid got refreshed, and let me go to weather grid. So this is basically, I wrote a SQL view for this screen, and whatever the cities that I've searched so far are going to be here. And I have a pagination. I set it to 5 items per page, and these are all the cities that I've searched so far. And I have a sorting country, and then sort, then speed. And then I have something like a search button here. It's a little smart. I'm gonna say haze, and I'm gonna say clouds. I'm gonna say 4 and say 5. Oh, sorry, 4 and 5. And I'm gonna say 1 and 3. And then Mumbai. So it's gonna search based on what you type. And for this SQL view, I added created date and updated date, so the user would know when it is actually been created and updated. And let's go. Okay, let me edit something which has. Okay, let me edit this city. Now, updated date is created and updated is 12/10. Let me go. Edit. I'm gonna say, see, it's gonna give me the city name that I've selected. I'm gonna say update, and yeah, I'll go back to my grid. And where are you? Okay, it's here. It's 10/12, so this has been updated. Now let me go back. Let me do a delete here. It's gonna throw me a pop-up. I'm gonna say okay. The grid got refreshed and you no longer see the record on the UI. But I am gonna have a history of all the cities that I've entered so far, and I'm maintaining this in the database. I created a delete indicator. It's gonna delete from the UI, but I'm gonna make indicator as 1, and that'll I can still have that in my database. And like I said, I hosted this on AWS platform. I'll walk you through the steps of how I created Lambda on AWS and what all steps I did. And before that, let me go to my code, and I'll explain you the steps. So for a program, main method is the first method. So it's the starting point. And for a .NET application, when you create a .NET application with Angular, so Visual Studio has this cool feature. You can just go and you can say create solution, and you have certain templates. And I created a .NET Core application with Angular, and you have something like .NET Core with React and AWS serverless solution and so on, something like that. But if you want to create an AWS serverless solution, you have to first install AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio. Now let me go back to my code. So like I said, program file is the starting point. It's the entry point of application. This is where my application starts. and you can see it's the main method. It's calling create host builder. And this method, it is used to start the web host. So, and that is something which will host my web application. Now, it is in turn calling a startup method. This startup method does a lot of things. Now, going back to startup method, I'll come back to uh, create default builder to this screen later, and let me explain you startup page. So basically in our startup page, we are going to define our configuration settings. We have two methods, two methods. One is the configuration method, and the other one is configure method. They and these are where we would define our configurations. Let me tell you in detail. So in our configuration services method, we're gonna add services which our application would configure. And in our configure method, I'm gonna define all the request handling pipelines, and like as a series of these middleware components. I'm gonna get into details, and let me tell you about configuration services. So, like I said, in configuration services, we're gonna add all the services which our application uses. So you see, I'm adding controllers, I'm adding HTTP client, and I'm gonna do that by using services.add. This is the extension that we would use. And here, if you can see, I'm configuring my database here. I'm configuring my database here. And one thing is .NET Core has an built-in dependency framework. If you can see, yeah. And then my configure method. So this configure method, like I said, it is used for request handling pipelines, and it performs like operations on HTTP context. It's gonna either invoke your next middleware, or it'll invoke your next middleware, or it can like terminate it. And if you wanna invoke it, then we are gonna use app.use extension. So we're using our routing, endpoints, everything in our configure method. So yes, and I'll go back to my program.cs file, and you can see like we created create default builder method, and then create default builder, and then we are calling our startup. So basically, the create default builder, it would load your host configuration, and it will load your application configuration. So for the host configuration, that would generally happen via your environment variables. And for application configuration, there's a file called appsetting.json, which we are gonna define. I did configure my connection, and I gave my API key and the URL, and this is the API key which I got from the OpenWeatherMap website. So I think you understood the flow of how the application would start, and how I've configured my database and all the connections. And this is something I initially created in my local application, but later on I had to host it on AWS platform, and then I created a Lambda for it. So like I said, where's program? So like I said, create default builder. I host builder. Uh, is this is this something which is used to host your web application? So what I did is I created another method, lambda entry point, and which I'm overriding the init method, and I'm calling my startup page. So I use the Lambda entry point, and I use the package Amazon Lambda AWS sorry Amazon Lambda ASP.NET ASP.NET Core Server. I'm sorry about that. So I've installed this from the NuGet packages, and then just use it. Simple as easy. And you're doing this, and you're good to host. And I'll explain. There's certain more. There are a few other steps to this too, and I'm gonna say that in a while. So yeah, I think this is the startup, and this is how I've uh, given all the connections, and I'm using all the connections in my configure services method. Like you see, I'm configuring it over here. I'm in the API key, the URL, and like SQL. You can see that very clearly over here. Okay. And coming to my database. So I created these tables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tables, which I showed you in the response a while ago. So this has these values, and city ID is the primary key for city table, and this is going to be for my foreign key for rest of all tables. And that's how I did the mapping. And this has column ID as its primary key and city ID as its foreign key, like I said. And I created a, a view, a weather grid view. And for this, this is something I showed you before, the grid over here. Oh, sorry, this is my local. The grid over here. So I'm using a weather grid view to display data on this screen. And like you can see, I'm so sorry, like you can see, there are like 7 tables and a SQL view. And I wrote Poco classes in my models file. And let me go to cities, and let's see, I wrote all of them. So I made this application a hybrid model, which is a combination of code. It's not, I cannot say it's a combination of code first approach and a database first approach. This, I created a database first, and that would something be like, oh, it's a database approach, but I don't have any migration files here. And the syntax, I mean, something, these data annotations would, oh, these data, if you look at this file, this model file, looking at the data annotation, you would be like, oh, it's a code first approach, but it's not a code first approach. It is a hybrid approach. I created my database, and to map it with my application in my models, I added these annotations, data annotations, and this is something the using that it would use these two data annotations and data annotations.schema. And I've configured using the table name, schema name, and the column. This is something which this naming is something which I have in my SQL. So that's how I'm configuring my DB database entities with my backend models. Okay. And I think we're clear on how all the variables are over here. There's something. And yes, so here is our DB context. So I'm gonna for my application in my controller, if I would wanna get a response, or I wanna make any operations to my database. .NET uses DB context options builder method, and that is something which is used to contact to your database. I'll show you where exactly I've used it. So I'd say context, and this context is my WeatherDB context. WeatherDB context is something which I've created over here, and I've added all the tables that needs to be that is interacting with our UI application backend and playing with the API response basically. So this is something. This is a syntax of DB context. I've added it here, and then I'm good to use it in my controller. Now, yes. Now let's go back to the screen over here. Let's go back to the screen over here. I'm saying weather search, and I will like, I'm gonna get my weather data here. So it's calling, it is this API which is used to bring the data. So current weather by city name, and I created a weather service here which has all my business logic for this controller. Let me go to the implementation, and this is gonna bring the response from the weather API that I just incorporated from the public API. I'm going to my weather controller. You see, I made certain conditions. I want to insert and update based on the delete indicators, and ID is my primary ID for city table. I'll go to insert weather method, and you can see, like I said, it is a get call. It is a get call, but I am doing an insert and update operations in the same call. So I'm going to this method, and you can see the tables that are going to get affected with that call: the city, this cloud, this main, weather, wind, everything. And delete indicator has a certain role to play in this method and this update method. And again, I'm going to do my update. It's a little different, but functionality is still similar. Okay, and this is my controller for bringing my weather data. And going back to the filter screen, Come back to my filter screen. There is this all of these cities. I created another drop down. I created another controller, in which I'm doing all the get operations, and like I've created a lot of them, but I'm just using the city drop down, and I'm filtering it based on the delete indicator. Like I said, I am inserting when I say search. When I say search and when I say check, it's gonna insert in my database. There are chances that our database will have duplicate values, and just to filter them out, I added an indicator, and and for my weather filter, I'm displaying all the data which the user haven't deleted from the weather grid. I hope you understood. And that's what that's how the indicator is useful over here. So yeah, like I wrote many of them, but I'm just using one of it, and this is my okay. I think that is just a pretty much easy call. It's just just the weather filter. And for weather grid, here I am using search. I all this sorting function, sorting and pagination and filtering, I've done it from front end and from mainly from back end. This is a SQL view, like I said. It's the sorry. So I told you that it's a SQL view, and I wrote the get for SQL view here, and this would be my delete for this functionality. So I go back here and I'm like delete weather indicator by city ID. That's it. And you see here I'm changing the indicator value over here. I'm updating it to true, and I'm basically updating the update date so that it would be easier for a user. They would be knowing at what time it has been actually created, and it is getting updated. So this is my controller functionality, and let's go to Angular. So client app is my main Angular folder, and this part is how it actually looks. And let me go open app. And these components are something that I've created, and this Angular application template would default come with a component.html, module.ts, and app component.ts. In my module.ts, I'm gonna add and import all the components that I'm gonna create, and I'm gonna declare them. And if there are any certain templates that I would want to use, like I'm using Material UI for this application, so there are certain things like that that are used here. Like you say, I'm using pagination for this grid. I'm using a pagination for this grid, and that would require mat paginator module, and I'm importing it here and declaring. And there's something called this routing that I've added to my Angular application, and you can add a app.routing.ts if you want. If it's a like a very big application, there's like a lot of routes and a lot of pages and lots of things, you can always put this part in different different app.routing.ts file. But one is like a little small application. There's just three UI pages, so I didn't feel the necessity to have another page, and I implemented them right over here. So this is my path, and if it's a weather search, then I gave this route link in my HTML page, and and it's going to navigate me to weather search component. I can show you. This is weather search, and if you go back to my HTML page, oh sorry, it's in my navigation menu. So for weather search, here's the navigation that I've indicated. Okay. And now we're wondering, okay, we have a backend ready. How are we gonna connect a backend to a front end? So there's this models that I've created in my backend. All these models, they are. I'm gonna open city model for you. And my city backend model here. These are my Angular models. You see, I have created a similar model so that I can map my API response to my front end. And I created a service, an Angular service, which actually has my API controller name, my controller method, and the parameters. And this is gonna I'm going to use HTTP get, and these are all get methods. I think I wrote a delete over here, and might delete all the API, sorry, services over here. And this would actually map my backend response to my front end. And Angular is pretty simple. It's very easy. And I'll open a screen, and okay, let me open weather filter. So for my weather filter, this is, I guess this is the second screen over here. So I wrote a little bit of CSS. I added background image. I gave a column, and I use ng model here to bring. It's gonna do a two-way data binding, and it's gonna bring data from my backend. And this is easier, and I wrote a get method in this, and that would give my the grid which is below this. Say Hyderabad and say 6-day weather forecast. It's gonna give me this grid, and I did write like few in NGF condition that this filter, sorry, this grid will only display after button click or something like that. Yeah. So this is pretty much my front end and back end code. And then going back to how I how I configured everything on my AWS. This is AWS is something new for me, and this has been a good learning experience for me. And I'll share you what I did for hosting my application on AWS. First thing is I've created a AWS VPC virtual private cloud, and so basically a VPC is used to run different AWS resources. Now here we have two of them. I'm gonna use my application. There's my application, and there's my SQL server coming to my local. And if I want to move that to AWS, I would want something similar like that. So for AWS, I'm using my Lambda, .NET Core Lambda, and I'm going to create a SQL Server database instance on my cloud. So here my resources would be my Lambda and my SQL Server instance. So I'm not gonna create a new VPC or something, but I would just give you an overview of how I created mine. And yeah, firstly, I've started creating subnets. So firstly, like I created my VPC here, and then inside my VPC, I added subnets to my VPC, and this is basically to hold your AWS resources for like uh, routing purposes or something like that. Like I've used Internet Gateway and NAT Gateway for routing through my subnets. And this is the second step that I've created. I created a VPC, I created a subnet, and then I created a internet gateway. So basically, this is something which enables, oh, this is my VPC, and this is something which enables internet access to your subnets. And if there's a routing through your gateway, then that would be a public route, or else it's going to be a private route. And I created internet, where is NAT gateway? NAT gateway next. And this will provide again outbound internet access to my my VPC. And yeah, and there's one thing that I forgot to mention. I created 4 subnets. 2 of them are public, 2 of them are private, and I used just 2 regions two regions for public subnets and two regions for private subnets. And then I gave my routes in my routing table. So here I configured my VPC main route table to be a private subnet. And then I created security groups here. So this is basically I created them to allow all the inbound outbound traffic from my IP address, and this is something which will help me connect to my SQL server. So we are done with our VPC connections, and then I'm gonna go back to my RDS instance where I created my SQL Server database. So before I create a DB instance, I created something called subnet group. I'm not gonna do that. It's gonna charge me. So I created subnet groups, and then I created my database instance, and I can go select my VPC there, my subnet group that I've created before. And then I'm gonna say there's an option to enter password for your instance, and if I open mine, I would get an endpoint here. This is something I can use it to connect to my database. And password is again something you would set there, or you can say auto generate, and that would give you some random password, and you can use that to connect to your database in your SQL server. And then next comes, and then I like I said, I created the application in my local first, and then I deployed it to AWS. So I had my DB scripts ready already. Once I created my database instance, I just went in, ran my database scripts, and I'm all good to go. And then we have our VPC connection. We have our database instance. Now what comes next is our Lambda. Now I'm going to Lambda. So Lambda, before creating a Lambda function, I created an IAM role, and I just to enable Lambda to execute in my VPC that I've created. And I gave AWS Lambda VPC access execute role here to my IAM role, and then I created a Lambda function, and I selected .NET runtime, and that's it. And yeah, while creating, I think that's pretty much I did. I created an IAM role, and then I created a Lambda. That's it. And I chose .NET as a runtime because I'm running it on .NET Core. And then what next comes is my AWS API gateway. Here, this is my HTTP API. And this, after creating HTTP API gateway, firstly, I integrated my Lambda here, and then I configured routes, and then that would generate me with this URL. Now, if this is my application URL, so like you can use it. Yeah. Yeah, I created my Lambda, I created my API gateway, and then all I have to do is now deploy my application to Lambda. Now, like I said over here, our lambda entry point.cs is gonna be our entry point. There's something that you guys should know. There's something called AWS Lambda tools in .NET. you're gonna go to NuGet packages and install the package, and go to your command prompt, select your project directory, and say, and you're gonna run uh, .NET Lambda package. This would generate a zip file of your application, and you can go to lambda function, the function which you have just created, and they say there's something called core source here. Say upload from, and say zip file, and I'm going to say upload, and this is my project directory, and I'm going to DB project, my bin, and release, and .NET app 3.1, and this is the zip file that it has just generated. .NET Lambda package has just generated this zip file. I'm going to say open, and then like save. I'm going to cancel it now. And before doing that, there's something that you would want to change. You're going to change your runtime settings, and DB project is my application name, assembly name, project name, and this is the starting point, which is overriding my main method. I'm an AWS Lambda and functional handler async, and you edited your runtime settings. You've uploaded your zip file. You say save, and then that's it. You're all good to go. You go back to your API gateway, and then there's this URL which you got here. Go to this. Your application starts running. I think that's it. That's pretty much my weather application. Thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you have any doubts, feel free to comment. If there's something that I've missed, or there's something, there any mistakes that I've made, please feel free to comment. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience. Thank you. Have a good day.